no longer a question about whether the jobs and industries of the 21st century will be centered around clean, renewable energy. The only question is, which country will create these jobs and these industries?
在82年那个时候，中国每年消耗大概是5亿吨，那么现在差不多是应该是接近37亿吨标准煤。
You want energy for your home, for transportation, for communication.
整个能源来说呢，在全球来说都是一个挑战。
我们要加快调整我们的能源结构，压缩我们能源消费的总量，特别是煤炭的这个消费的总量。
并且中国呢制定了一个很宏大的一个发展目标，到2020年的这个清洁能源的比例要占到整个能源消费量的15%。
这个电站呢是目前是世界上最大的单体的并网的这种光伏电站。
For China's, in terms of energy, is just trying to mobilize enough energy fast enough to feed this monstrous juggernaut economy. And it's an economy that's in a deeply energy-intensive phase of industrial and economic development. So energy consumption is rising at very high rates, total energy consumption rising 5-7%, oil consumption rising 5 and 10% every year. So electricity demand over the last decade has been rising at 10 and 15% a year, just extraordinary pace. And so the challenge is just mobilizing enough energy to make sure that energy is not a bottleneck to economic growth, to the job machine, to social stability, and ultimately the political legitimacy of the Communist Party. So everything they do is aimed at how do we make sure we have enough oil, how do we make sure we have enough coal to burn to generate enough electricity. How can we find any other generation source, because electricity is growing at enormous size and scale, and that's the big challenge.
The country is the world's largest producer of carbon dioxide. 16 of the world's 20 most polluted cities are there, most of the pollution caused by coal-fire-generated power.
The big elephant in the room for the Chinese energy picture is 2/3 of their energy supply is in coal. Global average is about at 25%, so I mean wildly outsized compared to most places. Why is that? Well, they have a lot of coal, a lot of inexpensive coal, and they need a lot of electricity, so this coal-electricity nexus is driving a huge consumption of coal, and that continues to grow at a rate of anywhere from 7 to 10% a year of coal consumption. About another 20% is oil, and that's growing very fast because of first industrial use, but motorization is beginning to really accelerate in China, so oil. And then you have small parts of 5 to 7% hydroelectric, a little bit of nuclear, although it's growing very fast, and renewables are growing extremely fast. The big gap in the normal energy mix has been natural gas. As little as 5 years ago, it was 2% of the energy mix, 25% worldwide. So they've been stepping on the gas literally to accelerate use of natural gas, because it's half the CO2 and pollutants of coal, and so they want to use a lot more natural gas. They're building pipelines, doing all kinds of things, trying to mobilize natural gas, but it's still only 6 or 7% of the mix. But it's coal is the elephant in the room that creates a huge sets of environmental issues. Just the scale of moving enough coal. Something to try to get some perspective on this. In the 10 years from 2000 to 2010, the increase in Chinese energy demand, just the growth, is equivalent to 2 Latin Americas. So they've literally created 2 continents of energy demand, new energy demand, in the space of 10 years. And every 5 or 6 years, that's going to continue to create another new continent of energy demand. So the scale of mobilizing coal and building enough power plants, doing all this is just absolutely staggering. And it helps explain why the problem is so severe, because it's so big. Trying to change the mix to a cleaner mix while you're meeting demand, I always say it's like changing your tire on your car when you're driving 80 miles an hour. It's a very difficult thing to do, so it's a tough challenge.
Maybe in 15, 20 years, then the role of unconventional gas will be very, very important for the country.
The U.S. and China hold about a third of the world's recoverable reserves of shale gas. But unlike the U.S., China is only just beginning to tap that resource. This year, China completed its very first shale well, a process that now takes several weeks in the U.S., took 11 months in China. So China is investing in American know-how, spending more than $1.5 billion in the last year for stakes in a pair of U.S. shale ventures.
So the significance is that means the Chinese national oil companies continue to push overseas, so they go pretty much everywhere.
China is the world's biggest coal producer and consumer, but it's also the world's biggest investor in renewable energy. According to this report on green energy technology investment, China came in top for 2011. It put in $52 billion in renewable power, placing U.S. in second place.
Richard Gledhill is an analyst at PricewaterhouseCoopers.
China is very well positioned to become a leading player in green technology. The combination of its continued economic growth, its technological and manufacturing capability, and strong government commitment is creating real momentum in the green tech sector.
Simply stated, utilizing wind to turn the blades of a turbine which generates electricity produces no harmful emissions in the process, unlike coal, which releases high levels of carbon into the atmosphere. There are two kinds of utilization which must be addressed in any discussion of wind-powered developments: off-grid and in-grid. Off-grid utilization is primarily as an independent power operation system, often in remote regions. The power generation capacity of a single off-grid generator ranges from 100 watts to 10 kilowatts. In-grid power is integrated within conventional power grids, providing the most economical and large-scale utilization of wind power. Chinese enterprises have mastered advanced off-grid wind turbine generation technology through technology transfer from foreign companies.
State governments now providing capital and to selected turbine manufacturers that have proven that their technology is viable and sustainable and meets international standards, to give them the capital and the financial support to allow them to export and compete in the world. Chinese turbines are at least 20% below the prices of international turbines that are built on a euro-based dollar in Europe and elsewhere.
Xinjiang, China's far western province on the ancient Silk Route, has been a crossroads for culture and trade for thousands of years. Closer to Kazakhstan and Pakistan than to Beijing, the vast region spans an area 7 times as big as the UK, and it is home to the Uyghurs, a Muslim ethnic minority. Xinjiang is prized by Beijing for its abundant natural resources and plays a key role in China's energy strategy, thanks to its rich reserves of oil, coal, and natural gas. Yet today the province is at the front of the nation's newest energy push, renewable energy, and particularly solar power.
Here in the village of Jisodze, the 15 Kazakh herder families that live here get all their power from the sun. Before these solar panels were installed, it was impossible to run a television or a refrigerator, and children did their homework by candlelight. Today, that has all changed. This project is only a small one, but it's representative of what is happening across China as new solar farms are going up at an exponential rate.
China has vowed to cut its dependence on fossil fuels and has become the world's biggest builder of new wind farms, hydropower dams, and nuclear power stations. This year, solar power is also set to take off, thanks to a new tariff for solar projects introduced late last year. Analysts expect China's installed solar capacity will double this year, and next year China could overtake Germany and the US as the world's biggest installer of new panels.
阳光越充足，日照越多的地方，那么它的这个发电效果和效率就会越高。大家都知道，新疆这个纬度上面，它的这个葡萄、甜瓜，都是最甜的，原因就在于它的这个日照很充足，那么阳光很充足，那么最终它也是一个非常丰富的一个我们的这个阳光的来源地，那么也是我们非常丰富的这个太阳能建设的一个地区。
Most of China's new solar panels are being installed in large-scale solar farms in western regions like Xinjiang, Gansu, and Qinghai. Just as importantly, albeit on a smaller scale, solar power is playing a key role in bringing power to villages in some of the most remote corners of the country.
这种情况下面，能够为少数人，比如说我们这一个定居点，大概有100个人左右的一个定居点，那么给它用太阳能供电的成本会远远低于我们建一个火电站，或者说是从大电网上面拉我们的供电线路到这个村落里面来。在这种情况下呢，我们才会使用这个离网的太阳能电站。
This remote military farm, called Beitashan, near China's border with Mongolia, is off the grid, and all its power comes from the solar panels in the middle of town. Those who live here have seen their lives changed by access to electricity. One of the factors behind China's solar boom is that the prices of solar panels have dropped dramatically in the last 3 years. China is the world's biggest producer of solar panels. Many of these are exported, but more and more are now being sold into the domestic market as global demand for solar panels slows down. Against this backdrop, the growing market for solar power in regions like Xinjiang is not only good news for Chinese panel makers, but also for a global solar panel market that is struggling with overcapacity.
The Chinese solar panel maker SunTech is battling with a series of problems to keep the company alive. In fact, the Chinese Business Journal quoted one source that said they might be declaring bankruptcy this next week. The news yesterday was that the company will close down its only U.S. manufacturing operation near Phoenix. In the notice of the closure, the Chinese company complained that the closure of the Arizona facility is due to higher production costs exacerbated by tariffs the U.S. placed on Chinese-made panels and components. Those tariffs extend beyond the Chinese-made panels, but also to aluminum framing that SunTech used in the panel mountings. The company's statement confirmed that all 43 employees at the Arizona plant will be laid off. They said this is in line with a 20% company-wide overhead cost reduction that they will need to make. SunTech's problems stem back to June of 2008. That was when SunTech invested in Global Solar Fund, a company investing in power plants in Spain and Italy. In May of 2010, SunTech guaranteed a finance arrangement of €554.2 million provided by China Development Bank to companies related to Global Solar Fund, using €560 million in German government bonds from Global Solar Fund capital as collateral. However, on the 30th of July, SunTech revealed that the bonds didn't exist. They were apparently forgeries. In the following week, SunTech shares lost 40% of their value.
The difficult part is that even though they're moving fast on renewables, just behind the U.S. is the largest investor in renewables annually, the overall electricity, this all general electricity curve is rising so fast that even with all these new supplies coming into the grid, they're still having to burn 10% more coal almost every year to keep up with this big steep curve. So it is this problem of changing a tire while you're flying along in the freeway. They're trying to meet the need. They're building it as fast as they can, but even so, they still have to keep using more coal. So this is a really difficult problem.
In China, where big business and big government are typically two sides of one coin, the corruption investigation targeting the country's top oil producer, PetroChina, stands out. The state-owned energy giant, whose parent company CNPC is the country's second largest firm by revenues, has seen a handful of top executives resign after word they're under investigation for severe disciplinary violations, code in China for graft. It's not clear yet what specific allegations they're facing, but what is clear is PetroChina has been splashing money around for years. An aggressive asset-buying binge saw it spend 330 billion RMB, or more than $50 billion last year alone. These purges suggest PetroChina will finally pivot away from asset accumulation at any cost. A bit of good news among otherwise nerve-wracking headlines for its largest foreign investors, which include Aberdeen, Templeton, and BlackRock.
The vast majority of total energy demand in both China and the U.S. involves fossil fuels. These countries are the world's leading carbon emitters and the world's leading competitors for oil.
China now has the largest car market in the world. Last year, they sold 16.7 million cars in 1 year. They passed the United States.
The result? The U.S. government says that in the next 25 years, America's demand for transportation energy, primarily oil, will grow by about 14%. China's demand will grow by more than 250%.
We in China basically share the same pool of oil and petroleum resources.
David Pumphrey tracks energy security issues for a Washington think tank.
One of the biggest energy security issues we face right now is China's growth in terms of its own demand. So that's really what is destabilizing energy markets.
I think there's a part of America that admires too what China is doing and how rapidly they're growing, and maybe a little anxious too about it.
Rayola Dewar is a senior economic advisor at the American Petroleum Institute. Her concern, the U.S. may now be outgunned in the competition for international oil supplies.
You have to bring the best to the table when you're trying to purchase these resources. Can you outbid the other guy? China's been doing a good job buying up resources.
In 2009 and 2010, state-owned Chinese companies spent almost $50 billion on global oil and natural gas deals. And according to business consulting firm IHS, last year alone, about a quarter of all the money spent buying up the world's oil and gas assets came from China. Along with all the acquisitions, Beijing has loaned tens of billions of dollars to countries like Russia, Venezuela, and Angola to secure access to their rich oil supplies.
They can come into a region and say, oh, we'll build you a school, we'll build the road, we'll do this, we'll do that. And they can outbid our companies if they want to.
Among China's recent partnerships, opening an oil import pipeline from Russia, buying up part of a Brazilian subsidiary of a Spanish oil company with rights to a gigantic deep-sea oil and gas field, and purchasing a stake in an oil sands company in Canada, an area where the U.S. already gets a significant amount of its imported oil, an amount that would increase if the Keystone XL pipeline from Canada through the U.S. gets built.
The other big juggernaut, Leviathan, is the U.S. The U.S. and China dwarf everybody else in terms of energy consumption, oil consumption, vehicle markets, electricity, coal consumption. Everybody else is Lilliputians compared to us. It's going to be very difficult to deal with things like climate, energy security, cooperation, strategic stocks, unless the U.S. and China can come to, it's not a G2 or E, I call it an E2, but we have to agree that each other's doing the heavy lifting that we expect. It doesn't have to be agreement as much as some consensus that we can work at common purposes. Otherwise, we're not going to solve any of these critical global energy problems.
China is a very large country by landmass, by population. It's a very large economy. And the economies of the world are connected today. So what happens in China impacts the rest of the world. What happens in the rest of the world impacts China.